Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. I'm your host, Kevin J.N. Hughes, and I am going to be talking today about Faith of Our Fathers. Was there a patristic era? And understanding how the Orthodox Church interacts with the Fathers, our criteria for considering someone to be a father of the Church, and stuff like that. So I'm really excited for this discussion. If you have any questions and you're watching live, feel free to put them in the chat box and I will answer them as best as I can, assuming they're on topic. If they're not on topic, then they may not get answered. And if you're watching after the fact, but still, if you have a question that's not on topic, still ask it. I might do a future episode about your question specifically, or or if it's really fast, I might even answer it on this episode. Additionally, if you're watching the pre-recorded, if you have any questions, ask them in the comments below. If it's quick, I'll answer it in a comment. If it's something that'll take more time to answer, then I will come back to it in a future video. But I do read all of your comments, emails, etc. Without and our sponsor for this episode is um God the Father Apparel. So head over to godthefatherapparel.com/freed and use promo code freed at godthefatherapparel.com, and you'll be supporting a great Christian company with great products, and you'll be able to also be supporting Freed Indeed Ministries by using promo code FREED. So definitely check that out. And if you love what we're doing and you want to support our work, then please consider becoming a member today at patreon.com/Freed Indeed Ministries. Use the link in the description below, and you'll get access to member exclusives. You'll get access to all of our book clubs and be able to fully participate in all of our book clubs. And you'll get access to lots of other things. In addition to that, you will be supporting Freed Indeed Ministries. So thank you very much. And without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to begin by reading a section, not a very long section, but a section of Thinking Orthodox by Dr. Jeannie Constantinou. And so let's begin there and see what she has to say. Was there a patristic era? Western Christians typically add antiquity as a requirement for being regarded a father, but there is no agreement as to what date marks the end of antiquity. The Orthodox, however, do not require antiquity, nor do they recognize any chronological limitation for the Fathers, because the teachings of the Fathers were never superseded by later theological developments. From the Western point of view, the age of the Fathers has been succeeded and indeed superseded by the age of the schoolmen, which was an essential step forward. Since the rise of scholasticism, patristic theology has been antiquated and has become actually a past age, a kind of archaic prelude. If the East accepts that there was an age of the Fathers, then either one has to regret the backwardness of the East, which has never developed a scholasticism of its own, or one should retire into the ancient age and practice what has been described as a theology of repetition. The latter, in fact, is just a peculiar form of imitative scholasticism. So that's from Florovsky, The Bible and the Church and Tradition, page 110. Dr. Jeannie continues, restricting the patristic age to a specific is totally arbitrary and unnatural, since the fathers are the bearers of the divine grace of the Spirit. The Church has never restricted this appearance to any particular period of her history, because the Orthodox ecclesiastical consciousness, the Church attributes the title of father in every epoch. That's from uh, Crestu, Greek Orthodox Patrology, page 15 and 16. So, um, and this says we have fathers from every era of the church, including some from the early 1st and 2nd century, St. Ignatius of Antioch, for example, and some more recent times, such as St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain in the 19th century, and St. John of Kronstadt, who reposed in the 20th. There's also Elder Thaddeus of Vitovnica, who reposed just at the end of the 20th century. So we even have fathers from as recently as the 90s. The church is patristic and will always be patristic, not because we live in the past, but because the fathers expressed the timeless, continuous tradition of the church. For that reason, every era can produce fathers. Since we reject the development of doctrine, what the fathers expressed in the past is just as true and complete today as it was in their time. There is also holy mothers of the church. However, we have very few writings by saintly women. Until recently, women were not usually educated, and since women were never priests or bishops, they did not often preach or produce many writings. So, let me just make sure that I don't want to read any further. No, the rest of this is mostly just um, different things, important things, but different, not on topic of today. So, today, what we're talking about, so again, that was Thinking Orthodox, pages 191 to 193. Um, was there a patristic era is the title of that section. So, basically what Dr. Jeannie is saying is that in Orthodoxy, we don't believe that there was a patristic era. And the reason for that is there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, if you say there was a patristic era, then you're relegating patristic theology to a certain time period. And in the West, this works because in the West, there's a belief in what's called the development of doctrine. If you believe that doctrine can develop and even should develop, then it's okay to have a patristic era where we followed these teachings and these doctrines, but now we know better. The problem is that in the East, we reject the development of doctrine. So for us in the East, we don't believe doctrine is supposed to develop, and we don't believe that we ought to develop doctrine. So therefore, for us to say there's a patristic era is would be to admit that there have been developments since that era, which is something we can't admit because if there have been any developments, then we are duty bound to reject those developments. So, by rejecting doctrinal development, we therefore automatically reject the idea of a patristic era because the church is to be apostolic from her inception until the very end of time. So, for all of time, the church is going to be apostolic, and that means that the church is going to be patristic because in every age, there are those who, through um, with great intellectual capacity and great piety, maintain that apostolic faith. So that means that every era has fathers, and that's why oftentimes You'll see in Orthodoxy, we talk very much about the ancient fathers of the church, like Saint Irenaeus, Saint Ignatius of Antioch, Saint Polycarp of Smyrna, um, Saint Cyril of Jerusalem. But we also talk about more recent fathers like Saint Augustine of Hippo, Saint Jerome, Saint Gregory of Nazianzus, Saint Gregory of Nyssa, Saint Basil. All of these are more recent fathers. And then we even talk about fathers who are more recent than that. So, for example, there's much later in Byzantine history, there's St. John the Fool for Christ. After that, in Russian history, you have St. Philaret of Moscow, St. John of Kronstadt, St. Seraphim of Sarov. You have in Greek history, you have recent figures like Saint Nectarios of the Aegean, who there was recently that movie, Man of God, was made about Saint Nectarios of the Aegean, and he is considered a father. I already mentioned for the Serbs, there's Saint Thaddeus of Vitovnica. There's in for some more general ones, there's actually that's the most recent one I can think of. That doesn't mean it's the most recent one, just the most recent one I can think of. And there are other people who may yet be declared fathers by the church. So, for example, I am hugely influenced by Dumitru Staniloae. He has not yet been canonized as a saint, but I hope that he will be. And if he does get canonized as a saint, then I believe that he will probably be considered a father because his writings are very, very helpful and useful to the church. Another one who I think maybe won't be considered a father, but who I hope will be considered a saint, is Seraphim of Sarov. Or, I mean, sorry, Seraphim Rose, not Seraphim of Sarov. He's already a saint and a father. Seraphim Rose may end up being considered a father. I think it's very likely that he'll end up being considered a saint either way. Point is, we have fathers in every epoch, in every era of the church. There are fathers among us today, and we just don't know it yet. So if you're listening to this right now, you may become a church father. As much as that may sound crazy to say, you have the ability to become a church father. It is not outside of your reach. So that brings up the question, what is a church father? Well, if you're someone who studies patristics, then you probably actually already, even if you're a Westerner, if you're somebody who studies patristics, you probably have a pretty good idea of what I'm about to say. Because other than antiquity, the Orthodox Church and the Western Church have pretty much the same definition of what it is to be a church father. So basically, and you know, don't come at me if I don't say every little thing, but my point is to give kind of a general idea here. So to be a church father, some of the things that would be required, the big things that are required are great intellectual rigor. So their writings and or sermons, teachings have to have a certain depth of intellectual wisdom about them. So for example, St. Gregory of Nazianzus, St. Basil, these are towering intellects, and their intellectual rigor is deep and rich. And one thing that I think actually makes them even better in all reality is Saint Maximus the Confessor. He's actually one of my favorites, even though I'm always forgetting his name, but he's one of my absolute favorites. But the thing is, what I love so much about people like Saint Maximus the Confessor, Saint Basil the Great, Saint Gregory the Great, Saint Gregory of Nazianzus, what I love so much about these people is not just the fact that they have this towering intellect, but that they're able to really, and this I think actually is sort of a byproduct of when you're really, really intelligent, when you're really, truly brilliant, you can explain these deep concepts to people who aren't as smart as you and have them understand. So, somebody like Saint Ignatius or Saint Irenaeus or Saint Polycarp or St. Gregory, one of the reasons why we can see just how brilliant they are is because they're able to explain things in such a way that someone like me, who isn't nearly as intelligent as them, is able to easily pick it up, able to really fairly easily understand what it is they're saying. So, Albert Einstein once said that if you cannot explain something to a kindergartner, then you don't understand it. In other words, if you cannot make a little child understand something, then you don't really know that topic well enough to be considered an expert. That's what Albert Einstein said, which I think is a fascinating thing given the sorts of things that Albert Einstein was working in. I often wonder if he was able to pass his own test, and if he wasn't, then I don't think that means his test is wrong. I think it shows great humility that he said that, because he would be humble enough to say that maybe he's not an expert if he can't, maybe no one is an expert in quantum whatever because they can't make a child understand it. Maybe that these are things that are kind of beyond our level to even call ourselves experts in them. But in any case, getting back to our topic at hand, I think that Albert Einstein's criteria works very well when we talk about the fathers, because in order, at least to my mind, to my limited human mind, in order for someone to really truly be a father, when we talk about them having towering intellect, I really think that part of that is not just having intellectual acumen to speak grand and lofty things, but to be able to explain those things on a level that people who don't have that same level of intellect can grasp. So, if you're really, really smart about a topic, but you can't explain that topic to someone with less intelligence to the point where they understand it, not to the point where they agree with you necessarily, because you have no control over whether someone else chooses to agree with you or not, but just to the point where they can understand what it is you're saying. So, for example, I have a friend named Jonathan who is very, very mathematical. His mind is very, he's just a brilliant mathematician. I have other skill sets. I'm very good about things like logic and philosophy and these things. I'm good at working through those kinds of things. I'm really not very good about mathematics. But Jonathan is so mathematically inclined. He's such a mathematical genius that when he explains mathematical concepts to me, I am able to understand what he's saying. Now that's not because he's making me that's not because he's making me into a mathematical genius like him, but it's because he is so intelligent about mathematics that when he explains it, he can explain it to someone who's unintelligent about mathematics and still get his point across in such a way that I'm picking up what he's laying down. Um, so, you know, that to me is part of what makes someone a church father, is that they understand theology on a level that they're so brilliant and so hyper intelligent that they're able to talk to folks like me and have us picking up on what they're saying very readily. I think that's what makes somebody like Elder Thaddeus of Vitovnica so brilliant. It's what makes somebody like Gregory the Nazianzen and Saint Maximus the Confessor so brilliant, is that they're not just spewing things out, but they are carrying us along and uplifting us. So, okay, that's one criteria. Another criteria is a certain degree of education. And by education, I don't necessarily mean that you have to have a PhD from a university in order to be a father, but you do have to be able to again, you have to be able to express certain ideas. You have to be able to understand those fathers who come before you and who are your contemporaries. You have to be able to participate in that discussion in order to be contributing to it. So there's a certain level of educatedness, whether it's self education or formal education, that is required. And by the way, in Orthodoxy, we definitely are big proponents of self education. Every person on this earth needs to be, I don't want to say this in a weird way, but one of the greatest, let me say it this way instead of needs to be, I'm not laying down a law here. I am stating a principle here. There is great blessing in the pursuit of wisdom, in the pursuit of knowledge. There is great blessing in being a person who wants to read many books about many different topics. There's great blessing about being a person who wants to be educated. So sometimes that manifests itself in formal education, like Dr. Jeannie having her PhD and being super educated. Sometimes it manifests itself in just reading every single article you can find, reading every book you can find on a topic, listening to tons and tons of great informative educational YouTube videos on various topics. All of these are things that educate us, that make us more educated, more intelligent, more able to understand deep things. So that's a huge part of being a father or mother of the church. You have to have the sort of intellectual capacity to be a father, and then you also have to have the actual exposure to the resources and you have to actually sort of expose yourself. You have to actually pursue wisdom and knowledge and these things. And so I'm going to throw in a disclaimer here, because I think some people are hearing what I'm saying and they're like, oh, so stupid people can't be saved. Wrong. Not every single Christian is called to be a church father. Every single Christian is called to be a saint, but not every single Christian is called to be a church father. So, um, well, every epoch and every era produces fathers. Not every single Christian is going to be a church father or mother. So, um, we have these criteria for declaring someone to be a father. Not everyone is going to meet these criteria, but that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that they're not going to be saved. It just means they're not going to be in this particular group of fathers. So, and not every saved person, not every saint is known to the church. Right, on All Saints Day, we confess that there's a multitude of saints known only to God. All of the fathers are known to the church, so the church knows who the fathers and mothers of the church are. So, another criteria to be considered within the rank of fathers is, in addition to being intellectual and educated, you have to be in line with the other fathers. So you have to be, in order to be a father, you would be faithful to the tradition. St. Paul said, hold fast to the traditions we have delivered to you, both orally and in writing. So the the traditions of the fathers, you are part of that. You are both in your practical life and your teachings, you're living in accordance and teaching in accordance with all of tradition, including the scriptures themselves. So that's a deeply important one. You have to be, the church does not change over the centuries. She is consistent. We don't believe in doctrinal development. So you have to be consistent with the other fathers. That doesn't mean you're just repeating, you're not just parroting, because each father lives in a different age. So you might express the teaching differently. You might express it in a way that addresses the particular problems and um, crises of your particular moment, but nevertheless, what you're saying is in line with what all the other fathers have been saying and have said. So that's an important factor. Another important factor is the idea of, um, so in addition to intellect and education and the teachings being in line with tradition, you also have to have a pious life. So, being a person of prayer, great piety, these are fundamentally important. And I will say that in the West, I don't necessarily see, because of scholasticism, I don't necessarily see this being as firmly um sort of stressed, at least. So for example, somebody like John Calvin is held in high regard, and we really don't know very much about his personal piety. We know a little bit, and there's books that have been written about it, but what people really care about with John Calvin is just his towering intellect, which I'll grant John Calvin was a very highly intelligent individual. And I've just spent the last half hour, or much of the last half hour, talking about how important that aspect is, but that aspect divorced from personal piety, which I'm not saying that John Calvin was divorced from personal piety, so don't come at me with that. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm just saying that when you exalt one instead of the other, you get bad results. So, for example, all these people arguing on the internet about theology and constantly starting arguments about Calvinism and about 5 points and all this, and spending all day on Facebook arguing with people about 5 points or Romans 9 or whatever. That's not good, and that demonstrates a clear problem with that theology in the West, that in the West, not just in Calvinism, but in the West in general, you have this sort of emphasis on arguing about minute points in theology and not about this focus on piety and on the life of prayer. So that is something that in order to be a father, as much as all of the towering intellect and as much as the education and as much as your teaching and life have to be in these certain ways, there's also this very practical piety, this you have to be waging that war against the passions. You have to be a person of deep prayer, and all of that is really equally essential to the other. Okay. So that's what it means to be a father, to be a person of great intellect who can actually um who's actually educated in the things of the church, who is not only who's not only intellectual and educated in the things of the church, but also has their life in order and is operating in a manner consistent with tradition, but then finally to also be a person who is living a life of prayer and piety and theosis in the word. So that's what it means to be a father, and we believe that the church has people like that in every era, and that's why we have fathers in every era, and mothers too. So that's what it means to be a church father or mother. That's what it means to be seen in this light, and that's why there's no patristic era, because the church still has people like this to this very day who are carrying on the patristic work. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope this video is helpful, and I hope that it maybe helps shine a light on some different things and helps to give a better understanding of how we Orthodox are approaching various things. And I also hope that it will help any of you out there who are on a journey towards Orthodoxy or who are Orthodox to understand your faith better and our faith better. And I hope this will help to produce good dialogue among Christians. So, thank you very much for watching. Please share this with your friends so that they too can be freed.